Good evening, everybody. Welcome to UX+Data. So tonight we have LaToy Adams. LaToy is the founder of Wonder Why Consulting. Wonder Why provides research and education consulting to create engaging content and products for children and families. Previously, LaToy was a UX researcher designing and conducting user experience research on virtual reality and learning management systems. She was also a research director at Michael Cohen Group, where she led agency research for clients like Nickelodeon's Bubble Guppies, YouTube Originals Kids, and Learning and the U.S. Department of Education. She's also on the board of the Children's Media Association. So please welcome LaToy.
Hello, can you hear me? Won't make any sudden movements. I'm going to ask Ashley to come up. So round of applause for Ashley. She's going to get her mic.
Hi, guys. There we go. Hello. I'm going to be talking a little bit later in the presentation, but just to give you a short introduction about myself, I have founded a company called Mobster Chef, which is a website that teaches children how to cook with their parents. And so I will be giving some examples from my work there later on. And I would love to take any questions or meet you guys all after.
Awesome. Okay, so who here has conducted research just in general? Show of hands. Okay. How many of you have conducted research with youth? All right, it's about half of that. And what about parents? All right, and teachers? A little less, okay. So you're all engaged in the space. You might have some things you want to tell me about, which I'm open to for sure. My intention today is to share some of my approaches to solving these kinds of problems of designing and conducting research with children, families, and educators, a unique population that needs often a special approach, care, and understanding. You'll find that the discussion today will be grounded in developmental psychology, as well as the foundations of UX as well. We're going to go over, I lost my mouse is somewhere. Oh, I found it. Okay. So we'll start by going over developmentally appropriate research practices, which is a concept grounded in the early childhood education space. We'll get into some ages and stages and other contexts for how children develop. This is a very high level overview, so you won't get any credit for today, just so you know. UX production cycle will just set some context so that we're all on the same page about what we mean when we talk about UX research. This will be helpful as we get into the methodologies. We'll have 3 case studies, and we'll go into the approach to concept testing, an approach to play testing, and an approach to survey research. And then if there's time allows, we'll get into some process implications. If not, we'll just roll right into the discussion because I imagine some of those questions will come up anyway. Along the way, I think it's traditional here to just for me to just go through and not welcome questions during the presentation. But I'm getting the sure, why not? So okay, so yeah, if something's like burning and you're like, if I don't ask this now, it might be weird later. So like we can do that, we can get into that. So feel free to raise your hand or stop me. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, so you guys will it'll be quite interactive, hopefully. All right, so let's get going. So what do we mean by developmentally appropriate practice? So this is something I learned about when I was a teacher's aide at a preschool. And it's a concept that was first adopted by NACE, which is the National Association for the Education of Young Children. They are an accrediting body and a professional organization that's designed to support, inspire, and encourage educators and schools in the field of early education. So that's ages 2 to 8, I believe. So the DAP, developmentally appropriate practice, is a series of guidelines to help education programs serving the early childhood population. And it gets into how best to serve the needs of the children in the schools. It covers learning standards, it covers curriculum, technology, cultural considerations, assessment. So just like high-level guidelines for how to approach solving these problems. And it's based on what we already know, what the research and our experience with kids and teachers and families tell us that what we already know about kids. And it's based on applying that knowledge of child development, the data and the facts to the education space. So what's important about it? The important thing is that it includes 5 dimensions that are a good reminder and that have pretty much formed the basis of my own approach to research. So I studied developmental psychology. I didn't study HCI or some of the other fields that a lot of you might have. So when I come at solving a problem, I'm thinking about what approach, what method, what design, what context is going to help me understand what kids need and know and how to relate to the developer in that process. So in a classroom, you're talking about creating community, teaching practices, constructing a curriculum, which is the what that they're learning, assessment, and relating to families. It reminds us that child development includes not just physical development, it also includes social development, cognitive development, and emotional development. They're all important and closely related. They all need to be considered when you're designing your studies or developing your products. They're a collection of interpretations that could help you make better use of your demographic data. So are you considering the social and physical conditions that your child participants are growing up in? It can also help inform the design of your UX+Study protocol. Like, have you created a product or a testing environment that is appropriate for the physical development of the child or the emotional development of the child? Do they need their parents to be there? Is it better for them to have another peer there so that they can more easily settle in to the research scenario and be more prepared to communicate with you? So these 4 things, I think we are super duper basic, but can be easily taken for granted. And it's like, this is like how my brain is organized, right? So just getting you like in there, all right? So as children develop, they show an increasing abilities in areas like these. So we know that there's a certain series in development, and typically developing children, that you can expect them to hit certain milestones as they grow up. For example, fine motor control, whether they can swipe or scroll, self-regulation, can they wait for that video to load, symbolic capacity, do they comprehend or can they estimate what the basic UI elements do, temporal, do they understand the depth of space and time that your product has been developed in, particularly when it comes to, say, for example, VR. And we know that when they grow, one of the things that helps them acquire these skills is the construction of knowledge by engaging with the environment or the more knowledgeable peers or adults. So learning and growing, and even using technology, is a product of input from those who know just about as much as we know, and maybe a little bit more, so they can push us up a little bit. This is called scaffolding. So scaffolding is having an understanding of where children are already, what they already know. So do they know that the microphone means search? Do they have this idea that if I press that button, I can say something and then I'll get something? That's a schema. So if you know that they know that, and if they actually know that, then you can design a solution that is appropriate for them based on often other products out there. So we're often encouraging each other in this field to not reinvent the wheel. You really want to, like, if it's working, don't fix it, because that's just, they're good, and like, this is how we do things. Let's just keep doing it that way, right? So when I think about all of the concepts that we've discussed already, and I apply them to research specifically, one of the 5 things that I like to consider when I'm designing a study, or even starting to understand a product, and what a product is trying to do, their space. So these are some of the questions I ask. So when I'm designing a study, a warm test environment or scenario. So in the beginning, you want to come to this problem. How do I learn what kids know about a certain topic that I'm going to then develop an app about? How do I learn if this design is usable and friendly? One of the things that you're doing when you're making those decisions about how to answer that question is to consider, when the child walks into the space, are the chairs at their level, if possible? Are there snacks that they're not allergic to? Have you asked them their permission? Do they get the impression that this is all about them, and we're all here to figure out what they know and what they think, because what they think is the most important thing? That's usually how we start. Like, we're so excited that you're here today. We brought you in because we're making a product that no one's ever seen before, and we want to hear what you think about it, because what you think is the most important thing. So that's usually how that goes, right? So then it's time to actually complete some sort of task and reveal their thinking. And play-based and story-based methods are not necessarily the point, but they're just examples of the fact that the methods need to be appropriate, and they need to feel less like a test, because they're more likely to take that disposition than an adult would, who can suspend disbelief, right? Is your protocol an empowering protocol? So like asking them, are you okay with, can I use the camera? Did you see the camera? Do you know why we have that here? Really what we call self-talk in a classroom, where you're helping them notice what's going on in the environment, why those things are there, what's important, how it affects them, and giving them the power to affect that environment. Are you engaging the community of stakeholders, including their parents or their teachers and your client, to make sure that the design and the research will be interpreted and in the context of their entire life? Because learning and growing and developing is a social activity. And you want to generate strong data. So just because you're working with kids doesn't mean that the data you produce can't be reliable or valid. So as we move along, we're going to briefly just go over some ages and stages. So things I remember. So in preschool, kids are leaving home, often for the first time, extended periods away from their families, to go learn some stuff in a formal environment. They're learning every day, all the time anyway, right? It's just like what they're designed to do. But then you put them in a school environment, and suddenly that becomes more complex, more formal. They're learning to count, they're learning to share, they're figuring out how to regulate themselves and manage their emotions. That's a lot of work they're just working hard all day. It's a lot. They get home, they're exhausted, right? So then you get to kindergarten, and there's like a desk that's for, like suddenly you're a big kid. Those like few months just make all the difference. You're like, Dora, you're just like, everything goes out there, and you're a big kid, and suddenly you're learning to compute with numbers, you're really engaging with reading, you have these literacy concepts that go beyond just understanding that pages turn, like those words have certain meanings that you can figure out, you can decode. These things are like really exciting. And then you get into grade school, and first, second, third grade, and your social circle suddenly becomes way more interesting and important and manageable. You might even be, You might even be like walking from the car, to the school on your own, and kind of like starting to find your own space. You get into grades 4 and 5. I mean, by the end of grade 5, they might even have their own cell phones. So lots going on in this short time, right? They could be walking to school on their own. There's all sorts of things going on there. So understanding who you're developing for, grown-ups, we're users, we get it. You flip the switch, it works. But when you're dealing with kids, you have 5 people user study. That's like generally what we do, right? But if your 5 kids are 3, you got 1 3-year-old, 1 5-year-old, 1 9-year-old, like, what you doing? It's not gonna work. You need some more kids, right? So this is one example of how understanding child development as a baseline for your approach to testing and taking the time to really get in there, or ask somebody who knows, can really improve upon your study design. So we're talking about, we're gonna get into some actual examples. So one of them is concept, one of them is a prototype, but it's not necessarily paper, and then one is a survey. So, all right, so here's our first one. So before you get started, the first one, the concept testing. So let's imagine that you've decided, you've endeavored to create an app that will help kids ages 6 to 9 understand the solar system. How would you get started? You have this concept. Is anyone brave enough to venture? There's no right or wrong answer. We just want to get the juices flowing here about where one could start.
I make tools to use in the classroom, so I would go observe some classrooms where teachers are already teaching about the solar system.
So you made tools for the classroom, so you would go observe some classrooms and see how they are teaching about the solar system. Okay. So another hand somewhere.
Probably where we started, how we started her, because that's the thing that actually
So you were thinking about where are they already now? Where are they now? You're thinking, you're scaffolding, right? So you're like, where are they now? Maybe Earth. So that's your hypothesis. You're gonna start with Earth, and then from there you'll branch out and see what more can you do, just a little bit more, all right? So let's think about what method could we use to approach something like this? All right. So concept testing, some of the challenges includes ascertaining the appeal and resonance of something that doesn't exist yet, right? Like whether you're dealing with kids or adults, it's the same challenge. Trying to understand or ascertain how participants are understanding the concept of the product, again, when it doesn't manifest itself. That's a hard thing to do. Children are very concrete when they're young, the younger they are, and which means that they need to see it in order to believe it in some ways. As they get older, that becomes easier. They're more capable of abstract thinking and can assume and imagine with you and grasp your theory of mind, which is the ability to perceive that someone else has wants, beliefs, or ideas that are different from your own, which is like, what? All right, so misconceptions related to the product concept. Play patterns and problem solved. We'll get into how that can be helpful. The language that kids use when considering the concept and how they might interact. So one approach we could take is co-construction. All right, so these are 6 to 9, we were saying. So imagine you have this apprentice model where you're 6 to 9-year-old participants. Now that's a small range, that's good, so that's where we are. And you're gonna bring them in because they are the experts at what it's like to be 6 to 9. So you're gonna ask them what to do. Not necessarily because they have all the answers, but they can inspire you to think in a way that you might not be able to on your own. So with yourself as the apprentice and the kids as the experts, they can lead you, which is often the case, through an exercise of co-construction where you're building together in order to reveal your thinking. So imagine you get out your paper mache, your scissors, your glue, and you're gonna make a solar system, or at least create the kinds of models that would help you see and understand what kids know. So this is a visual spatial exercise, and through their work with their hands, through the expression of their of the products of the models they create, you get to see how they think. The set, you can use set models, which by that I mean you can decide in advance that there's some models every kid has to make. And the benefit of that is that you get to see how kids of different ages construct the same model, how those constructions get more intricate and detailed, how they may get more or less whimsical, what concepts that kids are bringing in from the things that they're learning about, what do they take for granted as an assumption. So, for example, you might decide that we need to make a spaceship. I have all the pieces here. I have a picture. We're going to make this spaceship. Can you show me how to do it? So, can you show me how is the question for this type of study. An open-ended build, which is a nice way to end or transition to, where you might decide, oh, we made a spaceship. It needs a planet, and so you may allow your participants to take their own approach. They may make a whole galaxy. They may just focus on one planet and work every detail out. And from there, you may learn quite a few things. For example, how are children laying out and organizing the galaxies? And how might that inform the architecture of the information you use for your site?
Can I throw a wrench into this?
Yes.
So if you're working with young people who have disability, whether it be visual or hearing, it seems that that's an important piece to think about in the mix of it. Of course, we don't know who you're going to get this study, but I'd love to hear you add that piece.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I'll be straight up that there's lots of folks who specialize in that area, and my research generally regards typically developing children or those without physical disabilities. So I haven't had a tremendous amount of experience there, but I imagine I'd love to get into that and during a discussion if that's okay. Okay, great. Okay, what questions do your kids ask about the planets that they're making as they're making them? How do they instruct you? Do they know what they're talking about? Like, no, you can't do it that way. Are they confident and are they playful? What is making them laugh? Which visual details resonate with them? Are they focusing on the craters? Are the craters having sound effects when they put them together? How might that translate into the delightful bits and pieces that come to inspire the design of the UI? What language are they using? How do they describe the parts and the components? And how could that language then be helpful in your copy editing and your copywriting? What do they think happens inside of the spaceship or in the atmosphere of this planet or that planet? Yeah, so approaches like these really get at the play. Like the play is the thing, when you're starting with their play, you're starting with where you're giving yourself an opportunity to see what it is that gets them smiling and laughing, and because this is a conceptual approach and the app doesn't exist yet. This could be exactly in a way to start with that frame of mind.
I know it's testing the concept because sometimes it's so challenging to translate that physical world into the screen, especially for a 5 or 6-year-old. Are there ways in this process to bring a screen in and kind of figure out how the concepts are related to the screen based on your faces?
You're nodding?
Yeah. So it doesn't literally have to be craft supplies.
Right.
It can be a super basic version of your prototype that you're just like you would for an adult. That also can work too. Like showing static screens that don't animate or interact, just showing something on a screen can sometimes be useful too, just also to understand, like, is the screen the appropriate thing for teaching this thing? So sometimes that can be done too.
So kind of bringing those mock-ups into this process and kind of integrating them as you're kind of uncomfortable with that. You can get some.
Yeah. So a hybrid. Yeah, that's so. If you happen to have designs or mock-ups ready, then you could go for it. And if you don't, you might be inspired to try it out even before you get there. You know? Okay. So we'll move on. Okay. So another approach is, okay, again, this is conceptual. You don't have any designs yet, but you want to understand, like, where to start. So in this one, we're talking about play observation, where one of the things I like to do is to go out and build these sets or create these dioramas or these worlds, buy toys and things, nothing too commercial, and step back and let the kids just play. And what I often hear are the jokes that they tell, what makes them laugh, what makes them smile, how the gestures that they make to explore the models, what frustrates them during their play, where they have trouble, what happens to the spaceship. Is it a crash landing? Are there babies on the spaceship? There's probably babies on the spaceship. What happens to the astronauts? Do they all die in the crash landing, or are they setting up the planet with new life forms? It really helps me get into, like, all right, this is where the 3-year-olds are. They're like babies on a spaceship, and then like the 5-year-olds are like, we're gonna make a new planet. So it just really helps you understand, like, just the variety, like just the gap between the oldest and the youngest kids that you may be developing for. And what roles do children play? Like, what attitudes or assumptions or ideas that they have during their play? How attached are they to the rules? We have some ideas about this. Again, like we know that kids start to get really interested in the rules as they get into, like right after kindergarten. Whereas when they're in preschool, they're kind of like, we're just gonna, I almost cursed, but I didn't do it. All right. So I find that these hands-on approaches are rarely discussed, but I find them to be super fun. They're fun to make. I've been at a company and we're there late at night gluing and getting the things together, and then we go out and everyone's like, yay, and no one's like, we're doing research. Like, it feels awesome. And so now we're going to transition into playtesting. Ashley's going to talk about some screen stuff. So come on up.
All right, so as you might imagine, playtesting is when you actually get kids to play with your product. Some aspects of this are similar to testing with adults, and some are different. And it typically is much more observation-based, especially if you're working with the little guys, because they're not super verbal. So that's one big difference between kids and adults. So when you're playtesting, oftentimes, of course, kids' products are trying to teach something. So you're trying to see if they're understanding that something. You also, like to the question before, you're trying to make sure that they stay engaged, because if a child isn't interested in your product, they're not going to learn anything from it. They're going to leave the room, literally. Or in the case of one of my playtesters, roll on the floor crying. So they will tell you if they don't like it. And you also are trying to get a sense of if they understand all of the navigation stuff. Again, the same sort of considerations you have with adults. But for kids, there's the added challenge of remembering that kids are not proficient readers until they're about 5 or 6. So if you're designing for preschoolers, text-based instruction is not going to cut it. So you use a lot of audio prompts, and do they understand the thing that the app is prompting them to do? And then if you have characters in your product, which you very well may, especially for young guys, do they connect with the characters? Kids, if any of you guys have ever interacted with a child watching a TV show, like, they think Elmo's real. Like, he is their friend. And if they don't develop the same interaction with your character, then you are in trouble. Okay, so before you start playtesting, like LaToya said, you have to make them feel comfortable. Literally get on their level. This is me. I was doing a test in a home, and I was given a tour of the playroom before we could start the actual test. And sometimes you have to do stuff like that to make sure that they're comfortable with you. And then you do want to make small talk, just like if you're testing with an adult, but tread lightly. If you ask them, do you have a pet? And Fido just died last week, you're in trouble. You're not getting any good data from the rest of the session. So try to stick to neutral topics, like what did you have for breakfast this morning? What's your favorite color? You also don't want to try to prompt them with anything that is related to your product, because they will just keep relating it back to the thing that they already talked about, and you're just going to hear about how your product is Sesame Street. So you got to be careful with your small talk. Also, like LaToya said, when you do your whole spiel of you're the first person to ever try this, and we're so excited to hear what you want to think, you also have to explain to them some of these things are not going to work properly. Like, we're just designing this, and you may click on something and it might not work. And so if anything's confusing, I need you to tell me. And again, you don't want to make them feel dumb. You don't want to make them feel like the problem is with them. You want to say, it's a problem with my app. Don't worry, you're not doing anything wrong. And so, yeah, also if you are doing anything that's educational based, you also might want to consider doing a pre-test. So you might want to find out exactly what they know before interacting with your product. So if it is about the solar system, you literally might want to ask, name the planets as a question. And then you would re-ask that same question at the end after they've interacted with your product, assuming that your product goes over the names of the planets. And then you can compare if they actually learned something from the beginning to the end. So then you actually get to do playtesting with them. And like I said, observation is number one here. So unless kids are about the age of 8 or 9, many of you might be used to the think aloud protocol. So when you have adults go through a screen or a prototype, you might say, like, tell me what you're thinking. Little kids can't do that. So yeah, so usually not until, I would say 8 or 9, it will vary on the individual child. I see a question? Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, can you use quantitative? Definitely, LaToya's going to talk about survey methodology, so she'll touch more on that. If you're really fancy, of course, you can do like the back-end data of what they click on and all that stuff. I've never been fancy enough to do that, but so yes, for me, it has been mostly qualitative with little guys. So body language is key. So I have done user tests via Skype is the top picture, so that's okay, but the whole, if you guys want to use like usertesting.com where somebody's just recording their screen, that is not going to work for a kid. Like, you really have to be able to see them. The good news for you is you'll get a lot of data from the things that they say out loud, and little kids will tell you if they don't like something. They have no sense of manners, so that works to your advantage here because they will tell you what they don't like. And also, good news is they will probably give you clues that they are liking something. So, laughter, or especially if they're doing a test with a peer group or with parents, their interaction with that other person can be super valuable to you as well. The hard thing with kids is trying to be a fly on a wall when you're doing these sorts of observations, because they want to engage with you, and oftentimes they want to make sure they're doing it right. Mm-hmm. So they'll do something and then they'll look up at you. And I try the trick of like just pretending I'm writing something down and like trying not to engage with them as best as I can, because I want to try to not to influence them too much. Definitely take pictures and video as much as you can, of course, assuming you've gotten the proper parental consent to do that, because things move really quickly and you might miss some subtle interactions that you might want to go back to later. And I also recommend, as you're going through, to keep a notes grid. Some of you guys might do this for adults too, but this is an example of mine. So, so here's a screen from my website, and I wanted to know who was the person actually interacting with the technology, because it's parent and child using it together. Were there any usability issues? Was it the parent or the child that was confused? Who was the person, so this is meant to be used while you're actually cooking. So who was the person that was actually doing the cooking step? And then child engagement, high, medium, or low. That literally means like, are they on task or are they off in the other room? And so this gets into like a little bit more quantitative to your question. So it can also be helpful to interview the kids after you're finished. So I would note, if you are working with preschoolers, you're probably not going to get great data for 3 and 4-year-olds. 5-year-olds start to be more articulate. The little kid answers tend to be hilarious, but in terms of directing product design, like medium. One helpful method, though, to use to your advantage here is if the parent is in the test with you, is you can sometimes have the parent ask the questions. Or also if you're doing remote studies like I've done, you can send them the questions ahead of time and just tell them, videotape it on your iPhone, send me the video. Sometimes kids are more open with people that they know rather than a stranger. So some examples of appeal questions, which is one of the areas that you're trying to understand, like, did they like the thing that they just did? So asking favorite part, least favorite part, how did this make you feel? It's helpful to use the visual Likert scale. So mine was for taste, so this was yum, okay, or yuck. But of course you can do it with emotions as well. And ask them to point to the face, like when you say, how did this make you feel? What would you tell a friend about this that has never tried it before? And then asking, what do you think about this character? Do you think this character would be your friend? Because you want them to say yes, and why? Why would this person be your friend or not? An example I just wanted to give, you have to think about subtext because kids are not great at explaining their literal feelings about things. So an example, I was working on a TV show that LaToya and I worked on together. We were testing an episode about Jack and the Beanstalk. And this was like a modern Jack and the Beanstalk. So it took place on top of, imagine like the Empire State Building. And the Jack character was on the like antenna. And the giant was kind of like pulling him over and he was kind of dangling like over the streets below. And so at the end, we asked, what was your favorite part? And the kid just kept saying, the giant and the city and the tower. And then we were like, oh, okay. And then we asked another question completely unrelated and then he raised his hand. And one time I had to go to the emergency room because I broke my wrist. And then and so you learn through that like, he's not telling you that scene with the giant was terrifying, you have to change that. But he's telling you that. So you have to think a little bit about context when you're interpreting these answers from kids. Mm-hmm. And then of course, if you are doing something learning related, you would do your post-test during this interview period at the end. And especially for little guys, obviously you can't read, you're doing all of this verbally. This is not a written thing. Okay, technology guys, we're gonna see if we can get this to work. So if all goes well, you end up with amazing data, like my friend Sam here. Oh boy, it's opposite guys. Okay.
There, you got it. Oh. Almost there.
So this is a parent test, or parent interview rather, after Sam made our chicken fingers recipe using my product. All right, fingers crossed, guys.
Sam, can you say that one more time?
This is one of the best chicken fingers in the world.
Who made it?
Me and Mama from Date
Yeah. Do you like cooking with Date Mobster?
Yeah, he's a cool guy.
So it's kind of hard to hear. So Nate Nomster is the character in my website, and he's like, yeah, me and Mama made it with Nate Nomster. Do you like Nate Nomster? Yeah, he's a cool guy. So that's an example of the type of data that you might get. He's a 4, I think. All right.
Okay.
Back over to you.
Awesome.
You got it.
Okay, so one more imaginary situation. Let's imagine that you are developing a product to help kids understand nutrition concepts, and you want to understand what impact your product is having. But your audience, your target users are kindergartners. Typically, you would engage a pre and post-test survey to get some sort of baseline directional data on, like, if you're heading in the right direction. But they're kindergartners, so what are you gonna do? How would you approach this situation? Ashley gave us a couple ideas. Does anyone want to toss in some more? Where you might start to assess the impact of your product when your kindergartners aren't necessarily reading a survey? All right. Have some. Oh no, Ashley. Okay, I found it. All right. So I'm going to introduce you to an approach that I took when I was on a team at the Michael Cohen Group. So we're trying to figure out, how do we survey this federally funded project in which we're supposed to generate really good data about the value of a product that's been, that's been designed to teach nutrition, and we are trying to get survey data to do that so we can analyze it in an appropriate way. Okay, so one of the problems is that kindergartners aren't necessarily going to be able to read the survey themselves. One, engaging with the survey, even when it's being verbally administered, can be, like, I don't even want to do it. Once you're in kindergarten, you're like, tests are a thing now, and it can really start to feel like it, and that's stressful, and we don't want to stress out the kids. They're our future. So, and then the other thing is that this abstract concept of nutrition, it's like, how are you gonna, you can ask them, like, well, how many vegetables do you know? And like, and maybe that'll tell you something, but we can be more creative than that, right? Yeah, exactly. So here's what we tried to do. We got together with an illustrator. We were doing a different project where we were testing content, and in order to test the content, we typically took the story, turned it into a storybook, and then we would go out into a school and like read the book to the kids, and they're like, "It's that one," and they're like digging it, and we're like, "Good, this is a good concept, good story. You're good to go." And so this artist was available to us, and we're thinking like, well, could we do that sort of thing where, but testing this product instead, like. I want, could we figure that out? So we decided to write an actual survey. So like, this is the actual questions we would have to do in order to generate the data that we need to see if there's meaningful statistical differences in their knowledge or skills after, or knowledge or attitudes after the intervention. And then we decided to wrap the survey in a story. So we thought, okay, let's create a character and have this character be the kindergarten kid, and let's have this kid have to make decisions that one would be able to demonstrate their understanding by answering the questions in the survey. So one of the questions we asked in our survey is, this is the plate where the food goes, here. Jadens Plate, Jaden was the most popular name of kids who were born the year that kindergartners were born when we did the study. So boys and girls, it was like, that was the name. Jadens Plate has 5 different spaces. You can use a space to make a food group. Now, choose the foods you think Jaden should have to make a healthy meal. Here are some foods Jaden can choose for lunch. These pieces, this illustration is flat, but when the book was presented, and I have a copy here, these elements were tangible pieces that could be pulled up off the page and stuck to the other side. Every researcher had a book, and they administered this survey by telling this story and listening to the kids' answers. As a result, they learned quite a bit. One of the things that they were able to do was to show that the kids had more appropriate and precise responses about ideas for what Jaden could do to be healthy, and I'll show you that page. I just realized I don't have it. Can you sneak into the blue one? The blue bag, I think it's in, blue or the black. It's a plastic thing. The options were he could exercise, he can be physically active, he can use energy. Thank you. Okay, so here's an example. Yeah, so let's see. All right, this is all about Jaden. And here we are. Yeah, so you can see you could put a piece there. And one of the, okay, yeah. So now that Jaden has had a healthy meal, it's time for Jaden to try other ways to be healthy. Let's think about it. Which of these things can Jaden do to stay healthy? And so there's these different answer choices. And we're able to analyze this data in order to generate some findings, such as in post-test. So this is pre-test, and you see what happened in post-test. using the same exact survey with the same kids. I'm not sure how long the intervention was. It might have been 2 months or something. So in this example, the number of kids who correctly answered things that he could do to be healthy nearly tripled from pre-test, which was 17.6% to post-test, which is 45.9%, which was shown to be a statistically significant finding. And there were many more findings like those. This is this was a straight up quant study. Like we were in SPSS, we were crunching that data. And the way we got the data, it was like, this is what we do. This is the fun stuff. This is why we get into this work. These are the problems that we want to solve. Like you could just go on and find some adults and give them a piece of paper and they can fill out and check some box. Or you can get an illustrator and write a book and print it out and give it to the people and then watch the kids do it. They didn't know they were taking a survey and they had so much fun. Some of them wanted to read it again. I'm like, yeah, knock yourself out. Just hang out. You know? It was so much fun, and I think that's where I'd love to end this, is that there are things that we need to do, the responsibilities that we have when we're engaging with kids and families, and we didn't get into a lot of that stuff. I'm hoping that you're inspired to try to think outside the box when you're trying to figure out how to learn what kids know and how to understand what they think about what you're designing. Whether you have a product or whether you have a design, or whether you're trying to get quantitative data, there are so many ways that you can do it in a way that's developmentally appropriate and that's responsive to their social, emotional, cognitive, and physical needs. And so now we're going to open it up to questions.
Please wait for the mic before you ask your question, but any questions? You want to come up? So we're going to wait for the mic.
Is there an age at which you think kids are can respond to like wireframes as opposed to like something that's more visually rich?
Okay, don't quote me on this, but I would say that even little kids can still respond. Maybe not a wireframe that's literally like a flow with an X through it just to get a sense of that sort of flow, but it does not need to be fully developed graphics for sure. Like my first prototypes for my company were like stick figure drawings. Even just giving them a little bit might be enough. But yeah, it doesn't need to be fully animated or like tappable, or you can still get good feedback just by showing them a still image. In fact, it's a little bit different, but we both come from a television background originally, and we would show storybooks of the episodes before we spent months and thousands of dollars animating them. So
Millions,
yeah. So yes, it does not need to be. Kids, you need to give them a little nugget so they can respond to something, but it does not need to be finished.
Okay, thank you.
How did you go about recruiting for your participants?
Was there a particular study you wanted to know about, or just in general?
Just in general.
Okay, so we're trying to figure out how do you go about recruiting. Well, that's a whole nother session. Oh my gosh, seriously. I'm recruiting right now, and it's just, oh man, it's the summer. First of all, just don't do it in the summer. It's just, goodness gracious, it's like so hard. So recruiting, there are a number of approaches. Often so we were both in television, and for like the first 10 years I was in TV, so all of that research was in the classroom. It was media testing, but it was educational, and so it was a welcomed experience by the parents and the school. You build those relationships.
And that's true more so for preschool age. Once you start getting into like K and
yeah,
it's harder.
She's absolutely right. I mean, it might even be like just preschool. Once you get into grade school, they're like, you want to do what? For how long? Like,
you have a standardized test in a week.
Yeah. Like, what do you want? This kid's on track. He's got to get to Harvard. We don't have time to be testing your product. So I think what I tend to do is, depending on the situation, you can often, the traditional route, with your external recruitment houses, your brick and mortars. I've used those. I've used online solutions where they use certain social media APIs to identify the types of users that probably have kids, based on their demographics or what they're posting, and to corral them into the study based on, like, of course, with all full awareness, knowledge, and consent to do so. Building relationships with community-based organizations is awesome. If you can get it done, that's great, because one, they're often the mission of the product and the mission of the organization they might be aligned. So if you're testing something that's nutrition-based, you might find some sort of kitchen or something where, like, or community where that is an important, that's what they're trying to serve, like a lunch program. Like, there's lots of free lunch programs in the summer when kids aren't in school, right? So where the kids go to the park and they have to, so like that's like where I would start thinking. I feel like every single approach to recruitment depends on the exact study.
Yeah, I was also just going to say it depends on the fidelity of the data that you're looking for. So for like scrappy startup like me that has no money, I look for people that I know or friends of friends that I know. Obviously that skews your data, right? Because you're going to end up with families and children that are more similar to yourself. Mm-hmm. But if the alternative is not testing it with any kids, then just getting it in front of children is so, so, so important. There's kind of the criticism of Silicon Valley that we create Silicon Alley here, that we create products, for 22 to 25-year-old males, because those are the people designing them. With kids, you have the obvious advantage of, like, you are not a child, so you are forced to do user testing. But to that point, your child is an N of 1. So if you're just testing it, if your options are, I'm going to test this with my kid and, like, oh, he likes it, or you can get like 10 neighborhood kids to come over and test it, like, definitely get those kids. And then if you have the funds, there are like all the other things. Or even if you don't have the funds, museums often sometimes will let you like set up shop in a corner and play test there. So there are ways around it.
Yeah, I think it all depends. Like, if it's a federally funded experience, you're more likely to be able to get into schools. You might, depending on your model of showing your appreciation. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for the presentation. I was feeling a lot because just like past year I was focusing on K-2 kids building product, but now I'm focusing 3 to 5, and I feel like you guys were presenting a lot about like younger kids, but if you were to play test for 3 to 5 older grade levels who know how to read, but obviously they're going through a lot of physical and psychological development like really fast. So is there like pointers you guys would provide for playtesting sessions with them?
For, what was the age?
3 to 5, grade 3 to 5.
Grade 3 to 5, not age 3 to 5, right? Okay. So grade 3 to 5. I mean, they're pretty fancy when they're in grade 3 to 5. I mean, I feel like, right? Like, I feel like pretty confident with, I mean, I would use appropriate like language, and being sure to set that empowering environment for them, because it still might feel like testing, in a lot of ways. But I think it's appropriate to be as like mature as possible when you're like hanging out with grades 3 to 5, because those are not.
Yeah, you'll lose them real fast if you try to baby them.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, cognitively, they are almost there on a lot of the things you might be testing, like, similar to adults, but behaviorally, that's where you really have to like dial in and be on their level and use appropriate vocabulary and things like that.
Yeah, like setting the expectation for the session. This is what we're here to do. You can talk about like it. You might want to talk about rules. It depends on if you're new. But like you're responsible for their safety. So like if you're in a group, I feel like that's more important. One-on-one, I don't usually have that problem when I'm doing like one-on-one sessions.
Yeah, and you can also try with some of them, encouraging them to describe what they're thinking out loud. They might be around the age where they're capable.
They can totally handle that. And also if they're describing it to a younger kid, like you can bring an actual younger kid in. It's like just like and do a paired session, if that's appropriate, because the way that they would, you can even have an older kid I often will bring in an older child, like a child that's just above the target age, because they often will have the language to tell me what the younger kids are thinking and feeling, but can't actually say yet. And then I'll kind of just like run that down. But projection techniques, they're great at that, because when they're younger, you're kind of like, let's pretend that, we're at a park. And you're like, this ain't no park. And it's like, well, we're pretending that we're at a park, So but when they're in grades 3 to 5, they're like, I got you. Okay, we're in a park, Like, what's gonna happen? It's like they're in there with you. I feel like, that's usually how it is,
With a lot of the younger kids, I'm assuming that the parents are actively involved, and so I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what sort of methodologies you use to make sure that you're measuring the right thing, and to make sure that the parents aren't overly interacting, or overly interpreting, or polluting your data.
That's great. Yeah. You want to start? Okay. So I like to put the parents to work, and they're like, sure, yeah, whatever. What I'll do is, so when I'm even with preschoolers, I'm often testing without the parents, even with preschoolers, because they're like, yeah, sure, take them. And then, we do the research, and, we're fine. And if sometimes we'll have like a meeting before the session. It's like, all right, Johnny, your mom thinks, you'll be okay. We had some time to hang out. We read some books together. I think we can go do the study. But if you want to, she can come along. And then Johnny's like, no, I'm good. I'll see you later, Mom. Or he's like, she's gonna have to come along, or I'm not going anywhere. So it becomes like a whole thing. So once we figure out like what Johnny wants or needs, and let the kid lead that, I find that parents are, in my experience, are very open to that, which then gives them an out without necessarily feeling guilty about it. Especially like when you drop your kid off and you're like, see ya, and you're like, oh, so it can be one of those situations. So that helps. That's a great way to start that, because then they might feel okay with just like being in the hallway and like you just handle your business. If they decide to come in, I will often have like an observation sheet for the parent. And what I'll do is, when I'm explaining to the kid about what this is all about and what the rules, I'm often talking to the parent. Okay, so you're the parent, right? David's your dad, and I'm just like, all right, Ashley, listen. We're here, this is just for fun. This is not something you have to do for me or for your dad, all right? You can stop if you want to, and if you feel like doing it, you can keep going. If you want to take a break, you gotta use the bathroom, this and that, we can do that. It's totally okay, whenever you feel like. This is the kind of thing that you can ask me questions. If you think it's funny, you can laugh. We don't have to raise our hands here. And we're just gonna do our own thing. I'll be here writing my notes. Your dad's gonna write his notes. Just pretend we're not here. And like by the end of that, they get it. They're like, all right, I'm gonna pretend. And then I often will give them a little pep talk before we even get in there. So it's like, he's gonna ask you for help, just don't do it. Because they want to get it right, they want to please their parents. I actually don't find that I have much trouble with the parents themselves. It's usually the kid who's like, is this okay? Like, can I touch it? Yeah, you can touch the app, you can go for it. Like, just pretend it's yours. And it's like, I don't know, I might get in trouble. So like, there's a lot of that, like, she's trying to, because, there's a whole dynamic there, who knows what just happened before the session started. So yeah, I find that the parents are usually chill. The kids are more concerned about doing it right, like Ashley said, about being good. That's a thing that they're really concerned about, especially when they're older. And so those are some of the techniques that I use. I keep the parent busy, give them a heads up, and give them an out.
And then the only other thing I would add is, if you're designing a product that is meant to be used for the parent and child together, you also get interesting data that way too, because some parents will completely take over the entire experience. Other parents will kind of go into teacher mode and like let the child be the guide, but that's important data also. So I just let them go if they do that, because I want to see both.
That's a good point, because that's what that's life, right? So sometimes everybody's different. Everyone's different. Same parents are going to be different on a different day, depending on when you catch them. So, like it is data. So if your product is going to be in that context, then that's what's really going to happen in real life. And so you need to be aware of what that's going to look and feel like, and how your product will need to survive through that interaction.
I think we also want to say one on this side.
So you guys talked a lot about how to do testing, when you're prototyping or right at the concept level. But But can you please talk a little bit about how to do the alpha and beta testing, and what you think are the best methodologies and tips for doing that? And on the flip side, what are the top things to kind of stay away from, or like mistakes in doing those, testing at that kind of stage?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would just say the examples that I was giving during play testing, like they were play testing with my product, not like literally playing. So yeah, it's kind of the same as for adults, right? Like you have them go through a flow, whether it's a fully functioning product or not, and sort of take notes. And you might prompt them on certain things, like how do you think you would do this? That part is fairly similar. It's just that they're probably not going to, like I said, they're not going to tell you what they're thinking. So a lot of it is going to be observation. So if you're like, how would you get to the next screen? And you see like, they don't know where to go, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas an adult might say like, I have no idea. So I would say going from like alpha to beta to like a finished product is going to be maybe not as different as you might think. I don't know if you've experience.
Yeah, my approach to that level, that stage of testing is to try to stand back a lot, just like we do with the grown-ups when we're just like, we try to let them talk and figure it out, but they don't, you're right, they don't talk it out. So typically what I'll do is I will give them specific tasks to do and just let them do it. So they're not saying anything, they're just doing the thing. That's normal for kids. Once they're done, I will pull out copies of the printed copies of the screen, of all the screens. And then I'll put the device away and I'm like, thank you for showing me how to do that. That was awesome. I learned so much from watching you. Can you help me remember what just happened? So then we'll pull out the things. So in the beginning, we started here. What's this app all about? And then they're like, it's the cooking place. That's so-and-so. And then boom, flip the page and like, well, and then where did you go? And then they'll talk to, and what about that? What do those numbers mean? And then, so we were just like, boom, just flipping through the hard copies, and that's where you're getting at the comprehension. All the stuff that they couldn't tell you because they were too busy thinking, because it's hard work. Just don't bother them. Just let them do it and watch and observe. And when they're done, then put it away, because it's hard for them to focus on the one thing you're asking when you put an interactive build in front of them, right? They're gonna like, let me show you. And then next thing you know, they're back at it and they're like, So I like to pull the app away and get tangible with it and run through the flow and ask all the questions, because we just did it, so I already know where they got stuck. I'm taking notes, and I know that like that they didn't discover a button, and then so once we get to that page, I'm like, did you see that before? And they're like, no. Like, well, what is that? What do you think that is? It's like, I don't know. It's where you talk, and that means it's search. So so like that's typically, that works wonders for me, and it really helps me get at it helps me relieve them of the burden of self-talking, because trying to remind them, that's really stressful too. They're like, what do you want? I'm just using this for you.
It's especially useful for buttons, because like we talked about before, you can't use a text label or rely on a text label for a button. So you want to make sure that they think it means what you think it means.
Yeah.
So that can be great to do at the end, to like make sure that all the navigational stuff makes sense.
Yeah, and I go through it really quickly.
Is there anything that you think we should avoid? Like, what are the numbers? Like, do not do that.
Well, it depends on like what it is you're testing. Yeah. I don't know that those are different than like, don't ask leading questions, and it's very, yeah.
It can be challenging if you're somebody that loves working with children to not give them feedback, because like I said, they keep looking to you. So you want to be like, great job, yes, that's right, but like you can't. So it can be really hard. I would just say like you can try being like.
That was helpful.
Uh-huh.
I learned.
Or okay. Or
yeah.
That was something I really had to learn when I first started, was to train myself to do that, because you want to give them positive reinforcement, but you can't.
Unless your build is having a tough day and this kid's on the verge of tears because the buttons don't work and the pages aren't flipping, and you're like, okay, it's you're doing a great, like I will jump in and be like, it's all right, baby, look, it's okay, it's not your fault, it's broken, we found a bug, we gotta fix it. And they're like, what's a bug? And then it takes their mind off of things. So we gotta wrap it up.
Okay, we're gonna do just one really last quick question, and then we're gonna wrap it up.
Thank you. Do you test the same features with the same kids twice? Or do you have to show it to new kids once you've made enhancements and improvements after the first round? Do you bring back the same kids, or are there any rules around that?
It depends on what you're trying to test. I would say, yeah, if you're trying to see if they get stuck on the same things. The problem is, by virtue of seeing it already a first time, they're going to have a better understanding of it, so your data's not going to be as clean. But it depends on what you're trying to, like all our answers, it depends on the actual thing that you're testing for.
Like if the thing, like something may be really specific, like a cooking app or something like that, and you may not have time to train them to cook and learn. So it's like you might want to get a cohort and just have them roll with you. So every time you come up with a new feature, you're just trying to figure out if this feature is working, because you may not have, like, it may take too long for them to learn the app and give you feedback on that feature too, because you have to onboard them onto the thing. That happened to me when I was testing VR, because there was so many components, and it's like, all right, well, let's just bring, it's the same thing. Let's just bring the kids back, because we don't have to. We know that they know what VR is. We don't have to spend the first 5 minutes just wowing, just like, oh my god, and then that takes. You have so little time. You might get 45 minutes with a kid. So that's a good reason to use a repeat design if your build or your experience is very fantastic, and you don't, or if there's a lot in there and you don't want to have to train them on it every time. That's a good reason to bring the same kids back.
Thank you so much, LaToya and Ashley, for a very wonderful evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to our volunteers for helping to check people in. I think there are still a few cookies left, maybe some pizza. Feel free to eat up what's left. Say hi to someone new before you leave. We will be back here on September 4th, so look out for the announcement for the next event, and we'll see you here next month. Have a good night.
Hi, can I put the last screen up?